They called me back after 12 years, but I had no idea what my sister was hiding. It was a cold, rainy night when I got the call. It had been 12 years since I last heard from my parents. 12 years since I walked away from their lives, a decision that was made for me, not by me. They had my sister, and then I was no longer needed. That's how it felt, at least. When I was younger, things were different. I was the firstborn, the one they doted on. They were always proud of me, always pushing me to be better, to reach higher. But then everything changed when they had Olivia. My little sister was a beautiful baby, and she quickly became the center of their world. I was no longer the priority. I could feel it. I could sense it in the way they looked at me, like I was just there, taking up space. It wasn't immediate. At first, they tried to balance both of us, but eventually, I could tell I was being pushed out. My school performances weren't as praised as Olivia's first steps. My accomplishments were met with indifference while Olivia's milestones were celebrated with a grand fanfare. The divide deepened with every passing year. It wasn't long before the arguments started. At first, they were about little things, homework, curfews, but they soon escalated. I wanted attention, I wanted love, but Olivia's presence was a constant reminder that I was no longer the most important person in their lives. I wasn't their priority anymore, and that hurt more than anything. I remember the day it finally happened. I was 16, and my parents sat me down in the living room. They said they wanted to talk. I thought it was going to be one of those uncomfortable talks about my future, about college, about life after high school. But it wasn't. "We think it's time for you to go live with your aunt," my mom said, her voice calm, devoid of emotion. "It's better for everyone. You need to find your own way." My dad, sitting beside her, didn't say a word. He just nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. That was it. Just like that, I was told to leave. My parents didn't fight for me. They didn't ask me to stay. They didn't even seem to care that I was leaving. I was nothing more than an inconvenience to them. I moved in with my aunt, who lived in a small town a couple of hours away. I never looked back. I didn't want to. The resentment I felt was too overwhelming. My aunt was kind to me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. But it didn't erase the pain of being cast aside, of being told that I wasn't needed anymore. Life moved on. I graduated high school, went to college, and started building a life for myself. I made new friends, created a family of my own. But there was always a hole, a space in my heart that I couldn't fill. And then, one day, 12 years later, I received the message. The phone call came at 9:30 p.m., just as I was finishing up dinner. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was from my hometown. My heart stopped. I answered, hesitant but curious. "Hello? Is this Emily?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, but familiar. It took me a moment to recognize it. "Yes, this is Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Mom." She said it so matter-of-factly, as though nothing had changed. We need you to come back." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. What? Come back? Why? There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, as if she was trying to find the right words. We need your help, Em. Your sister, Olivia. She's in trouble." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, in trouble?" Another pause, longer this time. I could tell she was struggling to find the right way to explain. Well, we don't really know how to handle it. She's been involved in something bad. We thought you might be able to help her." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't spoken to Olivia in years. I didn't even know if she remembered me, if she cared. The thought of returning to the place that had rejected me, the place that had thrown me out, made my stomach churn. "I don't know, Mom," I said quietly. "It's been a long time. I'm not sure if I'm the right person for this." But she didn't give up. She kept talking, kept pleading. "Please, Emily. We don't know who else to turn to." I could hear her voice cracking, and it hit me hard. For the first time in a long while, I could hear the desperation in her words. For the first time in years, I realized she still cared. Maybe not in the way I wanted, but she was still asking for my help. After a long pause, I said, "I'll think about it, but I'm not promising anything." The call ended, and I sat there, staring at my phone, unsure of what to do. 12 years of silence, of rejection, and now they wanted me back? They wanted me to fix things, to help Olivia? What had happened to my sister? And why now? The next few days were filled with confusion. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger than I could handle. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had always wanted to feel needed, to feel loved, couldn't ignore the pull. I packed a bag and booked a ticket to my hometown. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew one thing. My life was about to change in ways I could never have predicted. The flight was the hardest part. Not because of the flight itself, it was just a 2-hour trip, but because of what it represented. I hadn't been back to my hometown in 12 years. 12 years of living my life without them, without the constant reminders of how I had been cast aside. And now I was returning, not as a daughter, but as someone they thought could save their daughter. Olivia. I landed in the familiar, small airport, the one I used to pass through so often when I was younger. The same small, outdated terminal. The same air of nostalgia, mixed with a heavy dose of uncertainty. I had been here as a child, excited to visit my grandparents or leaving for a family vacation. But now, it felt like a ghost of a past life, one that was better left behind. I took a cab to their house. The streets were unchanged, the trees still lining the sidewalks, the houses standing just as I remembered them. Everything felt eerily the same, like time had frozen here while my life had moved on without them. As the cab pulled up to their house, I saw it, just like it was when I left. The same white picket fence, the same flower beds Mom had always cared for, and the same porch swing where we used to sit together as a family. But this time, it felt different. It felt cold. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the cab. There was no turning back now. When I knocked on the door, it felt like an eternity before it opened. And when it did, I was met by the face of a stranger, a woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She had my mother's eyes, but they were older, wearier. "Emily," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "You came." I nodded. "I'm here." My mother stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The house smelled the same, of old wood, faintly of vanilla candles. But as I stepped into the living room, I saw something that made my chest tighten. Olivia was sitting on the couch. She looked nothing like the baby I remembered. She was a woman now, a stranger in my eyes. Her hair was longer, darker, and her expression was distant, hollow. She barely acknowledged me when I entered. Her eyes flickered to me for a second, but she quickly looked away, as if it was too much to bear. I wasn't sure if it was because of me, or because of whatever situation had her in this state. "Olivia," I said gently, testing the waters. I wasn't sure what to expect, whether she would yell at me, cry, or just sit there, unaffected. But she didn't do any of that. Instead, she stood up abruptly and walked past me, heading toward the kitchen. My mother followed her with her eyes, concern written all over her face. "She's not herself, Emily," my mother said, her voice trembling. "We've tried everything. She's been distant, withdrawn. It's like she's in a different world. We can't reach her." I glanced over at my sister. She had her back turned, staring out the kitchen window. I didn't know what to make of the situation. There was something off, something deeply wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother hesitated, then led me to the couch and sat down. She looked at her hands, her face filled with regret and guilt. It's not easy to explain. After you left, things changed. Olivia started getting involved with the wrong people. We thought it was just a phase, that she was rebelling. But then, it got worse. We started noticing strange things. She would disappear for days at a time. She started hanging out with people we didn't know. And then, a few months ago, she came home with a look in her eyes that we couldn't ignore anymore. My heart sank as I listened. My sister, the girl I barely knew anymore, had fallen into something dangerous. But what? "I think she's mixed up with some dangerous people," my mother continued, her voice breaking. "I don't know who they are, but they've been around. And I'm scared. Emily, I'm so scared." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating me. I looked at Olivia, standing by the window, her posture tense and defensive. She had always been independent, but now she seemed completely closed off, a shell of the person she once was. "I'll talk to her," I said, more to reassure my mother than myself. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen, where Olivia was still staring outside. The silence was thick between us, as if there was an invisible wall separating us. I wasn't sure if I was even welcome in her space, but I had to try. "Olivia?" I said softly. "Can we talk?" She didn't turn around at first, but after a moment, she slowly faced me. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of the spark they once had. It felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone I couldn't reach, someone I wasn't sure I even recognized. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, almost robotic. There was no emotion in it, just coldness. I want to understand what happened," I said, taking a tentative step closer. "Why are you doing this? Why have you been pulling away from everyone?" She shook her head, looking away again. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I urged, my voice softer now. She turned to me, her eyes finally meeting mine. "You don't get it, do you? It's too late for me. It's too late for anyone to help." Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. It was clear that something far deeper was at play here than just teenage rebellion. There was pain, there was hurt, and there was fear in her voice. And I was beginning to realize that this was something bigger than just a family estrangement. "I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. Whatever you're going through, we'll figure it out together," I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside me. But as soon as I said the words, I knew they weren't enough. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't even know where to begin. Olivia was lost, and I was just a stranger trying to find a way back into her life. I just hoped it wasn't too late. The tension in the room was unbearable. Olivia didn't speak for what felt like hours, but the silence was loud in its own way. She was standing by the window again, staring at something I couldn't see, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. I wasn't sure if she was trying to protect herself or just shutting me out completely, but the walls she had built around herself were painfully clear. I didn't know where to start. My mind kept racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information my mother had given me. Dangerous people? What kind of people? What had Olivia gotten herself involved in? And more importantly, why hadn't my parents told me any of this earlier? I glanced at my mother, who was sitting on the couch, wringing her hands. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, regret, and fear. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite place. As much as she was trying to protect Olivia, I had the feeling that there was more to this story than she was telling me. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "You're not going to get it," she muttered, almost to herself. "You think you can just show up, pretend everything's fine, and make it better? You don't know what it's like." I took a deep breath and walked over to her, standing a few feet away. I didn't want to push her, but I couldn't just stand there. "I know you're hurting," I said gently, "but I need you to tell me what happened. Please, Olivia. We're family. I want to help you, but I can't if you don't let me in." For a moment, I thought she would brush me off again, but instead, she sighed and turned away from the window, her shoulders sagging. "You want to know? Fine," she said bitterly. "I've been involved in things you can't even begin to understand." Her voice was raw, as if the words were tearing at her insides. I could tell she was fighting to keep her composure, but whatever she was about to say, I could feel it would shatter everything I thought I knew about my sister. "I've been working with a group, people who, they know things, Emily. Things that are bigger than all of us. They promised me I'd be safe, that they could help me make everything better. I didn't want to believe them at first, but after a while, they made me see things differently." "Made you see things differently?" I asked, confused. "What do you mean? What have they done to you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at her hands, as if the very act of speaking about it was difficult. "They're not just random people. They have power, real power. And they know things about Mom and Dad that well, things I never thought anyone could know. I thought it was just all talk at first, but then they showed me something." "What did they show you?" I asked, my heart starting to race. She looked at me, her eyes wild with a kind of frantic energy I had never seen before. They showed me what happened to you, Emily. They showed me what happened when you left. They knew about your life, about everything. How you felt abandoned. How you felt like you didn't matter. They knew it all. My breath caught in my throat. How could they know that? We've barely spoken since I left. Olivia shrugged, her expression hardening. I don't know, but they did. And they made me realize something important. You're not just some victim, Emily. You're part of something bigger, something more dangerous. I shook my head, struggling to comprehend what she was saying. What are you talking about? What's bigger than this? What do you mean, dangerous? Before she could answer, my mother stood up, a look of panic flashing across her face. Olivia, no, we can't. But Olivia cut her off, her voice rising. It's too late. You don't get it. This isn't just about us. It's about everything. The people I'm involved with. She stopped herself suddenly, as if realizing what she had just said. No, I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I need you to understand, Emily, they're watching us. All of us. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Who's watching us? Who are these people? Olivia's eyes darted to the door, and I saw a flash of fear cross her face. They're always watching. They know where we are. They know what we say. They have eyes everywhere. There. The doorbell rang, cutting her off mid-sentence. It was loud, abrupt, and it felt like a warning. I turned to my mother, but her face had gone pale. She grabbed my arm with a look of fear that was impossible to ignore. Don't answer it, she whispered urgently. I looked between the door and Olivia, who was now standing rigid, her eyes wide with panic. Something was terribly wrong. The tension in the room was suffocating. But before I could make a move, the door swung open on its own. And standing in the doorway was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark hair, dressed in all black, with an expression that was both calm and menacing. Olivia, he said in a low, gravelly voice. We need to talk. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. My mother's hand tightened around my wrist, her grip almost painful, but I didn't pull away. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. Olivia looked at him, her face pale, and then back at me, her expression filled with silent fear. You shouldn't have come here, she whispered. The man stepped inside, ignoring my mother's futile attempt to block his path. It's not up to you anymore, he said calmly. We've come to collect. I didn't know what he meant by that, but it was clear that whatever Olivia had gotten involved in, it wasn't something she could walk away from. Not anymore. I glanced at my mother, who looked defeated, as if she had known this day would come, and I realized, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that I was in way over my head. The man stood in the doorway like a shadow, tall and unyielding, his presence suffocating the room. His eyes were cold, calculating, and they locked onto Olivia with an intensity that made my heart race. My mother moved slightly to the side, still clutching my arm, as if trying to shield me from what was happening, but I could feel her trembling. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. I had no idea what was going on, but something told me that this man wasn't just any stranger. His gaze shifted to me, and for a brief moment, I felt as though he was studying me, weighing something in his mind. You're Emily, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. The one who left. The one who doesn't belong here anymore. I flinched at the words. What do you want with her? I asked, my voice growing stronger despite the fear bubbling inside me. What's going on with Olivia? He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he turned his head toward Olivia, who had taken a few steps back, her back pressed against the wall. She looked pale and frail, as though the weight of everything she had been hiding had finally caught up with her. She didn't speak, but her eyes were filled with a strange mix of guilt and fear. Olivia knows exactly why we're here, the man said, his tone indifferent, like he was simply stating a fact. She made a deal that's now come due. My mother gasped, her face pale as she stumbled back toward the couch. No, that can't be true, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her, my mind reeling. What deal? What is he talking about? But she just shook her head, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the words. The man didn't wait for an answer. He stepped further into the living room, and despite my mother's instinct to keep him out, there was something about him that felt impossible to challenge. His presence was magnetic, commanding, and everything about him screamed danger. "She made a deal with us when she came to us for help," he said, finally looking directly at me. "She wanted something more than what you could give her, more than what anyone could offer. She made an agreement to gain knowledge, to gain power, and now the price is being paid." Olivia flinched, her eyes darting toward the door as if she were trying to find an escape, but there was no way out. The man's eyes softened briefly, almost like a predator playing with its prey. "You think she's just a victim? She's not. She knew what she was getting into," he continued, his voice almost cruel in its calmness. "But now, the agreement has consequences. And that's why we're here." I felt a pit grow in my stomach. What consequences? What's going to happen to her? My voice cracked, the realization dawning that I was in the middle of something that was far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. Olivia opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She shook her head, her hands trembling as she tried to gather the courage to speak. "I didn't know. I didn't know it would come to this," she whispered, almost pleading. The man didn't seem moved by her words. He glanced at her, his face unreadable. "You knew exactly what you were doing. The deal was made, and now it has to be honored." I took a step closer to Olivia, my protective instincts kicking in. "What deal? What did you promise them?" I asked, trying to get answers from my sister, but she was still looking at the man, her face pale and stricken with guilt. "Olivia," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Please, you have to tell me. What's going on?" She met my eyes, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw something like regret in her expression. I didn't know who they were when I started. I thought they were just people who could help me, you know? I thought they could give me something I needed to feel important. But then it got too deep, and now I'm trapped. The man stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Olivia. "That's enough. You've said too much already." Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. "I didn't know they were going to take things so far. They said they could make everything right, make us whole again, but it wasn't just about me. They wanted something from our family, something that could only come from the inside." The air grew thicker with every word. My mind raced, trying to make sense of her confession. What could they want from us? From me? "Enough," the man said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "This conversation is over. The terms have been set." He turned toward my mother, who was still standing in the corner, wide-eyed and shaking. "Your family has already been marked. There is no going back." His words hung in the air, suffocating the space around us. "The only question now is whether you'll accept the price or resist and face the consequences." My mother swallowed hard, as if trying to process what was happening. "What do you mean by marked? What price?" Her voice trembled, but she was trying to stay strong. The man's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's simple, really. Olivia made a deal. And you, Emily, are part of the equation now. The price for breaking the agreement is you." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you mean by that?" Olivia reached out, her voice filled with terror. "They're not just here for me, Emily. They want you. You were always part of the deal." The truth hit me like a thunderclap. Everything that had happened, the silence, the years apart, the sudden appearance of these people, wasn't just about Olivia. It was about me too. And whatever deal she had made had somehow involved me all along. The man turned toward the door, his hand resting lightly on the knob. "We'll be in touch. This is not the end. This is just the beginning." With those final words, he stepped back into the shadows of the night, disappearing as quickly as he had come. The door slammed shut behind him, and for a moment, the house felt empty. My pulse was racing, and I felt dizzy from the weight of everything I had just learned. But one thing was clear. My sister's secrets were only the beginning. The real story was just starting, and I had no idea how deep it would go, or how it would change everything. I turned to Olivia, who was now trembling uncontrollably, her face ashen. "What have you gotten us into?" I whispered, my voice full of disbelief, and I realized, with a sickening certainty, that we were no longer in control. The house felt colder now, the shadows from the night stretching into the corners of every room like they were closing in. My mind was racing, heart thumping in my chest. Everything had shifted in the span of mere moments. The man who had come to collect, whatever that meant, had left us with more questions than answers, but also with the haunting realization that Olivia's involvement in something far darker than I had ever imagined had dragged me into this nightmare too. I turned to look at Olivia. She was standing by the window again, her face drawn and pale, her body trembling as though she were caught in the eye of a storm she couldn't escape. Her usual defiant, rebellious demeanor had evaporated. She looked like a child, lost and frightened, not the sister I remembered. Her hands shook violently as she reached for the table beside her, her knuckles white as she gripped it for stability. "Olivia, talk to me," I said softly, stepping closer. I needed to understand, needed to know what she had done, what this deal meant, and why it had to involve me. Why is he saying I'm part of this? Why me? She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her lips trembling as though she were summoning the strength to say something that was clearly difficult for her. She looked over at our mother, who was sitting on the couch, silent and distant, lost in her own turmoil. "I didn't want it to be this way," Olivia whispered, barely audible. "I didn't think they'd actually do it, but now it's all falling apart." I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Olivia, please. What deal? What do they want from us?" She took a shaky breath, then turned to face me fully. Her eyes were filled with an intense, hollow fear. "They wanted something from Mom and Dad, something only you could give them." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "They needed a conduit," she continued, her voice breaking. "A link to your life. Something they could use to control, to manipulate. Something that could make them stronger." I felt as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. "I don't understand," I said. "What could they want from me? Why me?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "When you left, they saw it as an opportunity. They thought you were a weak link in the family, Emily. A way to control everything, to manipulate us all. They knew your pain. They knew you felt abandoned. And they used that. They promised me that if I worked with them, they would give me what I wanted. Power, control. They said they'd make everything better. But I didn't know what it would cost. Not until now." I stared at her, my mind reeling. The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Olivia had been promised something. Something so tempting, so powerful, that it had blinded her to the consequences.